Good afternoon, everyone. Let's try that again. Good afternoon, everyone. Come on, we're having a party this weekend. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this conversation with Jack Whitten. I really feel, Jack, we should be having some of your paintings behind you as we're doing this, but we have some things behind you. Let me quickly introduce our panelists for the conversation, beginning with our trader. Chris Bedford. I will let you know this is being recorded for posterity, so I needed to get that in there.
Worldwide.
Yeah, exactly. That will be on YouTube shortly, Chris. But seriously, it's wonderful to introduce Chris Bedford. Chris, as you all know, has taken the Rose to new heights in his far too short tenure here at Brandeis University. Yes, I think Chris has really brought new energy to the Rose. As I've said, the Rose is back and even better than before. He's integrated the Rose Museum much more deeply within our university with his shared vision for integrated arts at Brandeis. He's connected the Rose with the Waltham community with our infamous and famous Rosebud Satellite Museum. And he's brought the greater Boston area community here for our opening exhibits, and people from even farther apart, dare I say even New York, that realize that the Rose is even better than the Whitney. Yeah, we'll just put that all right there. And I haven't even had a drink yet today. So I'm just having so much fun this weekend. Now, earlier this semester, we were just thrilled to learn that the Rose Art Museum was selected to be the institution supporting the work of Los Angeles-based artist Mark Radford at the 2017 Venice Biennale. Yeah, that was a and both Chris and our other panelist, Katy Siegel, are the co-curators, co-commissioners of that exhibit. So as much as we're devastated by the news that Chris will be moving to the Baltimore Museum of Art, and I did tell the CEO, the chair of the Board of Trustees that if they weren't nice to Chris, we were going to take him right back. But Chris, we really are thrilled that you're going to the Baltimore Museum of Art. And Mike handling will be for it. But I want to announce that Chris will become an adjunct professor of the practice here at Brandeis University, so he won't really be leaving Brandeis
Department of Fine Arts.
And the Department of Fine Arts. So. Our next panelist is Dr. Katy Siegel. Katy is the inaugural Eugene V. and Clary Thaw Endowed Chair Professor in Modern Art at SUNY Stony Brook. And previously she was Professor of Art History and Chief Curator of the Galleries at Hunter College. She's also taught at Princeton and Yale Universities, and she received her PhD from UT Austin. Katy is our curator at large here at the Rose, and it's just, Katy, you've done so many fabulous exhibits that we're just thrilled that we're able to have some of your time here. Her interests include the relation between post-war and contemporary art and scholarship that accounts for both material and social being and making. Katy has done, as I said, many wonderful exhibits here at the Rose, including Light Years, Jack Whitten, 1971 to 1974, which was here at the Rose in 2013. And finally, my new best friend, Jack Whitten. We're going to hear a lot about Jack over the course of this weekend. Born in Alabama, Jack has been an active participation in the civil rights movement, and was a student in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and as he told me in his studio, after seeing all the hatred and violence there, just said, I gotta get the hell out of here, and moved north to New York City, and enrolled at the Cooper Union as an art student. In New York, he was inspired with folks like William de Kooning, Mark Rothko, Franz Klein, Philip Guston, Norman Lewis, and Bernard Verdin. But he quickly established his own vision. As he says, moving from being a painter to a maker, as he experimented with techniques and materials. As Jack explained to me in his studio last month, his focus is on constructing, deconstructing, and reconstructing. And all of you who know his work have seen that. His work has been the subject of numerous solo museum exhibitions, including the major traveling show entitled Jack Whitten, 5 Decades of Painting, that was organized by the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego. Obviously, his wonderful exhibit that we had here in 2013. His work is included in prestigious public and private collections around the globe, including the permanent collections at the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Whitney Museum, the Tate, and our own Rose Art Museum. And I'm thrilled to announce today that we will be adding to our collection here at the Rose with yet another piece from Jack Whitten from his Black Monolith series entitled Maya Angelou. So with that, I turn to our panel.
Well, Tracy will speak briefly, so just at the outset. I think when I'm most successful in these panel situations, I become essentially a spectator and an audience member. So I'm hoping that materializes here and I can intervene only briefly with a few questions. But I think it would be, we can follow the course that you've charted, Katy, and see where it takes us.
Passing the buck.
Yep.
So I thought since we're here to honor since we're here to honor Jack, as part of the weekend, we'll be receiving an honorary doctorate, and also to, as part of honoring him, honoring the values that he's embodied throughout his life, that I think is something, the values that the Rose and that the university at large has aspired to historically. So I thought we'd start with a historical graduation speech by Barbara Jordan from 1976, and she's talking about Brandeis students in the 1960s and 70s and the challenges of being a young person at that time. And so she's talking about how these students' voices were heard loud and clear during the 60s, and in the 1970s, she's hearing a little bit less. So she's talking about how these people were the first to raise their voices about the war in Vietnam, the defense of civil rights workers, and it was a difficult time to be a young person in the 1960s and 70s. And Jack Whitten spoke of that time and made work about that moment in the early 1960s when he was here in New York. So Jack, we're looking at Birmingham from 1964, and I wondered if you could start us off saying a little something about this work and where it came from for you.
All of you know that I'm from Bessemer, Alabama. So my whole background, I tell people every time I'm invited to talk, I'm a product of American apartheid. That's my background. What was happening in the South at that time? My baptism was by fire. I was one of the students that formed a huge civil rights march in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That would be the spring of 1960 before I came to New York. And it was that march that really changed me forever. I have witnessed some of the worst things that any of you in this room can imagine. I know what spilled blood looks like. I'll just leave it at that. That's what drove me out of the South. When the incidents happened in Birmingham, my hometown, what this piece is, that, you know, that image was all over the world. I'm not the only artist that responded to that image. A lot of artists, both here in America and abroad. What was different about Birmingham and what was happening, not only had I experienced it, but when those kids got killed in Birmingham, that happened in my hometown. It's different when what I call generalities of violence occur all over the world. Generalities of violence. It's endless. There's nothing you can do about it. It has a generalities of violence has a distance about it. We share our sympathies, but there's a type of violence that I call particularities of violence. It's when it happens to you. It's what makes it different. That word came out of the particularities of our life. That happened in my hometown. I know those streets. So that piece, it's a wound, really. It's a torn, open wound. That's what it is. It's a burst, something happens. You're peering through a veiled cloth. You're peering through this veil that Du Bois often spoke of. In this case, it's a very violent incident that takes place. Tough little piece. That's a small piece, by the way. It's almost about like that. Very small.
Powerful.
But powerful.
And all
vicious.
these pieces from 1964, and now I'm showing the heads, are all powerful and dense, have that feeling. And there is that feeling of double consciousness or veiledness in the way that they're made. I wonder if you could say something about the way that the heads were made that give it that feeling of blur, or some were seen through a screen.
My father was from Mississippi. I remember as a little kid, by the way, I lost my father when I was very young. I was 5 years old. And we would go to visit the grandfather in Mississippi. And I remember as a little kid, we passed through a town right on the border of Alabama, Mississippi. Something happened in this town. A black man was lynched. He was accused of burning a local church. They arrested him, put him in jail on the second floor of this courthouse. As the mob, a violent mob, was gathering down in the courtyard, the story claims that he was looking at them out of the second floor window, and an electrical storm happened. A violent electric storm. This man's face was etched into the glass of this window. And it was a ghostly image. And the older people will always point out that image of that man. To this day, okay, scientifically, I have no way of explaining this, but I firmly believe this day that those paintings came out of that experience of seeing this ghost image in that glass before that poor man was lynched. They're very ghostly image, you know.
Yeah.
The process is acrylic paint that is trapped between 2 layers of cloth. There's a thin layer of mesh on top of a canvas number 10 cotton duck beneath, and it's trapped. The image you're looking at is literally trapped in between those 2 layers of material. It was my first venture into true process. They're very photographic. You think that you are looking at blurred photographs. That's what they look at, right?
And it's from the beginning. It's so amazing how you are right out in front. You're so young. And formal experiment, which was not recognized at the time.
I was just out of art school.
Yeah, it's so far ahead to be making these painterly paintings that are full of ideas and full of politics, but also so experimental in terms of.
But nobody thought of them as paintings, you know. People used to say, "Oh, what are you doing? What kind of a camera are you using?" My first dealer said they're not paintings. And the images got so scary and freaky. The truth about it, I just covered them up and put them away in storage all those years. They were too creepy. They started causing a lot of, should I say, psychic damage. So I stopped looking at them.
I mean, you talk about how difficult a time it was, and Jack also has these wonderful studio logs and diaries that are very clear and thoughtful and literary at the same time. And you say about, and now I'm showing USA Oracle,
Yes.
which is sort of a culmination of figurative work from the 1960s. And you say, except for the fun of sex, drugs, jazz, and rock and roll, the 1960s in New York City were painful for everybody.
Everybody.
Yeah, it's a big except, but yes. And you talk about how you spent the 1960s having to sort of work through stuff and work through politics and identity.
The 1960s for me was my period of autobiographical research. It was Jack Whitten putting Jack Whitten on the couch. I literally picked myself apart. This painting we're looking at, USA Oracle, I met Dr. King when I was a student at Tuskegee in 1957. Made a big impression on me. There's a whole series of works for Dr. King. It must be at least 8, 10 of those paintings. This one in particular speaks to the assassination. There are 2 assassination paintings. This painting came before the assassination. The other one came after the assassination. I saw something coming down the pipe. I saw that.
That's incredible. I feel so dumb, but I've always assumed they came after.
No, that one came before.
That's so fascinating.
Oh yeah. USA Oracle. The story was there. You know, the mind is the most complicated instrument. Things happen in the mind that we have no control over. It's difficult for us to read the symbolic gestures that are located in the paintings. I call it catching it off the wire, is what I call it. There's 2 of those paintings.
So you've opened the door for me to ask a question I've never asked before, but with that story. So when I look at this painting, I remember the first time I saw it physically was at the Wexner Center, and it was in the context of the retrospective that Catherine Cantor organized. And I looked at this painting, and I didn't know that fact at all, but it looked like a conjuring to me. I mean, the way that the figures are inscribed within the paint. I mean, there's a kind of an emergence that occurs, as if you're painting an idea as it was becoming. And I remember looking at it and thinking it looks like a conjuring or a seance. That was my sense.
It's a frightening painting.
Yeah.
Very frightening painting. The image of the white crab. Obviously, I'm talking about horrible, violent white people. That's what I'm speaking of.
And so then this sort of comes to a head, and then you move ahead and say, I have to do something else. What made you make that break into abstraction around 1970?
I made it through the 1960s pretty much intact. I wasn't joking when I said except for drugs, sex, rock and roll. That's not a joke. You're looking at somebody, okay, I know people say, well, if you survive, you were not a part of it. I guess I'm damn lucky. Hell, let's face it, I'm one of the last guys standing. You know, it was John Coltrane. John Coltrane got so tired of my pestering him with questions every time I would run into him. So one night I remember he said to me, he had his hands up in the air. He says, don't you get it, don't you get it? It's a wave, it's like a wave. And something went off in my head, like bing, you know, like what today we call aha, what do we call it?
An aha.
Aha moment, that type of a thing, right? I'm sure John said that just to get rid of my young ass. But something went off in my head. The second show that I did at Allen Stone Gallery, one-man show, was called Light Sheets. It came out of John's telling me it was like a wave. All of a sudden I started experiencing light happening. I call it a sheet of light, a plain light, but it came from John Coltrane over the so it's like a wave. It's like a wave. getting through the 1960s with all of that imagery, and that's a lot of those paintings. Some of them are just difficult to look at. They are disturbing. I'm only human. There can't nobody dwell on shit like that for too long. It's like hate, you know? I'm from the South. Again, I've seen some horrible stuff. One thing I learned though, if you dwell on hate, it will eat you up. That you can believe. It will eat you alive. And that goes for black folks and white folks. It will eat you alive. I did my time, 10 years of those autobiographical, very intense emotional works. Moving into the 1970s, I realized that there was a part of painting that I had to learn more about. And it was the material aspect of it, the notion of matter. So I made this slab of acrylic paint. And that's all it was. It was a slab of acrylic paint. I had this tool that I built called the developer that I could lay down this slab.
Here
And
we
that
are.
painting you had showed was that was, you have some of the shots from that studio showing the
Yeah.
developer, yeah.
Yeah, so there Jack is. Can you tell him what we're looking at? It's a,
Yeah, you're looking at
Can
you're
you-
looking at the tool like.
can you tell everybody what the tool is, what the developer is? We're moving from paintings that looked photographic, like those heads, to then abstractions where Jack's really consciously thinking about developing
Yes.
paintings.
I'm still making the nod, I'm still using photography as a analogy. And always make the statement, truthfully, that the invention of photography is what really changed painting. That has been the thing that has changed painting more than anything. And I'm using it, I don't use photographic devices, I'm speaking of what we call analogia. It's more of a mathematical term, equivalences.
And this is a moment when people were most painters were trying to like hold photography at bay, just not think about it, not let it in, because it seemed to be threatening painting. And this is, again, like an amazing thing about Jack, just to be open to it, that this is the real world, this is happening, and I'm gonna do something with it, just really direct.
Oh, I saw it as salvation. But the developer was a tool that I made. It was 12 feet wide. I made this huge drawing board. The canvas was tacked down to the drawing board. That developer poured gallons of acrylic paint across the plane. What I wanted was a slab of acrylic paint, and I wanted to happen in one gesture. I was after something where the whole plane of the canvas operated as a line. It's one line. That's gesture. That's what it is. I just got a haircut. I'm 76. I still got a decent amount of hair.
Looks good.
Thank you. A week ago, when I needed a haircut, I had Kelly Jones ran into me the other night. She says, "Oh, just the other day you had your big hair. Your big afro went out." In the 70s, I had huge, right? One day I'm using my afro pick, and I said, "Wow, this is really a neat tool." And I started scratching into that slab. And that's what started all these series of paintings with this horizontality and this scratching through.
So why the single gesture? Can you speak more about
Oh,
that?
because Norman Lewis had introduced me to Ad Reinhardt. And it was Ad Reinhardt who really introduced the word reduction. It was him. Let's get real here, more so than anybody. And I knew that I had to find something that would act as some act of reductionary process. So what's a better way to take the whole picture plane and reduce it to one line? That gesture became a line. You got to remember now, I'm hanging out with Bill de Kooning, I'm hanging out with Franz Kline, big time gestural painting, hanging out with Norman Lewis, all gestural painters, Philip Guston, gestural painter. And I'm thinking, hell, if I can reduce the whole plane down to one line, to one gesture, that's it.
Yeah, you go beyond what they were doing.
Yeah.
you know, because you really break free and manage to make something that is photographic, that is a picture, that is pure process.
Pure process. And it has what was driving me also, the abstract expressionists used to speak of speed,
Yeah.
which was a very important element in abstract expressionist thought. It was more than just speed, though. It was immediacy. That's why I was so fond of Far Eastern calligraphic ink work. Early Chinese, Japanese calligraphy, right? Because there, within that one action, you get that, right? I removed the hand. I literally got rid of the hand, took it out of the painting. The whole plane became that one gesture.
So, I mean, just thinking about, just thinking about this, I mean, the idea with abstract expressions, it's expression after expression after expression, and speed is inscribed in
But that's
every
relative.
mold. But in yours,
Yeah.
it's one instant of
Yeah.
one speed, one gesture that produces one
It's the
thing.
purest example we have of non-relational thought. I
Right.
have to say that. It's the purest example.
And so the analogy extends to the idea to photographically of depressing a button. It was that literal to you.
Of course.
Yeah.
So that is the same as
Very
this.
much aware of that. Very much aware of that. In that, the aperture, right? Increase the burden, small amount of light comes in, bingo, sensitive silent plate. Or another thing that really helped at that time, the Xerox Corporation gave me and 4 other artists a grant. And they invited us to their factories up in upstate New York. There I was introduced to the early Xerox equipment. Flat plate. Xerox, you know, the name is Greek. It comes from xero, which means dry. It's a dry printing process. I fell in love with the toner. Fell in love with toner. I took toner to bed with me. I don't think Xerox would mind my saying that. Within the toner, you know, I discovered a whole range of possibilities. And I did. After the project, Xerox allowed me to take anything I wanted back to the studio. I kept their equipment in my studio for more than a year. Experimentation. So the Xerox grant really contributed a lot.
And so it's funny, because I'm showing Jack the show from The Rose from 2013. And you can see there's this photographic effect in the work, especially in things like the Pariah Way, which has a permanent home now here at The Rose, which is about 20 feet wide. It's a really big gesture. But at the same time, this is what some of the works look like that have Afrocombs or hangers or objects under them in relief. At the same time, you're using this really photographic technique. You're also looking to really traditional techniques and thinking about painting as carving. When you look at things like Ace's Palace,
Yes.
big chunks are carved out of the paint, and then they are glued onto other canvases. So they become, these are really the first painted collages made with acrylic paint. But it's very much also related to carving into the painting and to sculpture. So I wonder if you want to say something about your sculpture and in relationship to the painting and to that action.
You talked me into this. I've never done this before.
Thank you.
Those sculptures have been like tucked in the closet. My dear friend, you knew Harvey Quayton?
Mm-hmm.
Harvey Quayton used to say to me, "You're a closet case sculptor." I started carving wood, I was still a student. First wood carving dates back to 1962. The reason I started was that I had never seen a piece of African art until I arrived in New York. First time I came to New York was 1958. It attracted me. I read book after book. Cooper Union had a beautiful library there, and I could just get all the books I wanted. So I had this big introduction to African art through books. Brooklyn Museum had a few pieces. Metropolitan had a few pieces. Wherever I could go find a book, a few pieces, I would research this stuff, right? And then I had the opportunity to meet the art dealer Alan Stone. Right? Alan Stone put me in my first commercial show in 1965. Alan Stone had one of the largest African art collections in private hands. And it was Alan who allowed me to pick up these pieces. It was Alan who would say, smell it, you gotta smell it. He allowed me to pick them up and handle them. I started carving wood with the idea that if I could get my hands around these forms, maybe I could discover what this stuff was about. That's the way it started. Lo and behold, I've been carving wood since early 60s, 62 onward. The wood carving, more than anything, has informed the process in the painting. When I speak of light, as an example, light is a big deal in painting. The history of painting evolves around the notion of light, without question. I speak of light as a physical matter. I don't speak of it as something hocus pocus up in there. It's just physical. To me, it's matter. When I speak of light in painting, I say I can grind light, I can cut light, I can laminate light, glue light, polish light. Understand? In my hands, light in painting is another aspect of matter.
Like the mind is for you too.
Well, but that took me years later before I discovered that if this is the case with light, in terms of its connection to matter, then I discovered that mind is matter. And when we start understanding the notion of mind as matter, then we realize that we are off into another plane. Anybody, or all philosophy, and for me, painting art is a philosophy of life. That's what it is. My paintings teach me how to live. When I discovered mind as matter, I realized that in raising the philosophical question on the notion of being, that I'm off on another plane. That's what pushed me off into the metaphysical plane.
Which is what we're looking at, soul map here.
Soul map.
We jumped ahead to 2015, but I feel like this painting's really at the heart of that metaphysics for you.
Soul map. Shit can work both ways. John told me it was a wave. Then I point out, I read a lot. I really enjoy what's happening in part of the business. I read as much of that as I can. It spurs me on. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a mathematician, even though my early years at Tuskegee, I was a pre-med student. And I have spent hours and hours in the lab, peering under microscopes. We know energy, it can happen either as a wave or it can happen as a point. I work with both of them. That's what that painting comes from. Wave, point wave. The history of painting, every time the painter's hand, the brush goes down, a point is established. So a painting is a series of points.
Are they random points? Are they organized?
It can be whatever the painter wants it to be. That's for sure. I've known people who come to the understanding of this and they deal with it extremely intellectually, systemically, in terms of point. But it can also happen purely from an emotional, intuitive basis. I use both of them. I do not allow my intellect to deny my intuition. I don't do that.
It feels like in the work it's really a healing almost of coming together of that split between matter and mind.
Oh yeah, I believe we need both. Ultimately, after everything is done and said, my reason for painting is worldview. I'm looking for a worldview. We need a worldview. That's what we need. That's what I'm looking for.
There's a size and a magnanimity, I can't say that word, so there's a generosity. I read too much. And to breadth to your vision, and there's also a scale and a specificity to the way you've honored ancestors, family members, history, and the dead. And I think it really is also, that's culminated in the Black Monolith series.
I'm a Southerner. I'm from the South. You know, my mom, my grandmother, my aunts, and all of them, somebody died. You know what those people would say? We have nothing to do with that. We have no control of that. They were simply saying, that's God's word. Let God do his work.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they said.
Mm-hmm. There's a helplessness.
Hey, I'm a painter. When I meet someone that gives me something, when I read something, when somebody has spent all of their life researching something, it's impossible for any person to know everything. That's why we read. That's why we read. It's impossible for one person to know everything. We read to get information. We read to get knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. My knowledge comes from everywhere. I listen to what everybody has to say. I don't care if they're black, white, blue, purple. Like I used to say in the 1960s, it's all pink inside anyway. All right. Good. But we go down into deep. The artists are the people who have been going deep, deep, deep down, inner space. That's what we do.
You say that for the first time in 1964 in that studio log when you say, I want to be, every American should be able to see his face and his hand, and to go, identity goes below the surface.
Absolutely.
And so that theme of depth in
how the audience think identity is just about the color black. You're kidding yourself. Much more to it than that. Much more.
And these feel like big, generous, they feel like monuments. And here it is. This is Maya Angelou. This is the second painting the Rose was lucky enough to acquire through the generosity and support of the Brandeis and the president. And so I wanted to show that because it's such a capstone to that early work and how much room you've made in the world of painting.
Well, that's a black monolith painting. There's a whole series of black monoliths. They're dedicated to important black people who have made a difference, who have contributed something.
Mm-hmm.
People, you know, at home, I said American apartheid, segregated schools. We had very little to work with, but we had strong black teachers. You know what they used to say? Boy, we're teaching you for something. That's what they would say. Mm-hmm. We're teaching you for something.
Mm-hmm. Well, you certainly made a lot of what you were taught. And I feel like, I just want to say, Jack asked me to show some images of other painters. I'm showing a picture of you and David Reed and Guy Goodwin, because Jack makes a community wherever he goes, and he's done that for people here, I think, at the Rose and at Brandeis. But making connections to other artists. Guy Goodwin's another artist from Alabama. I think they made an amazing tour.
Well, that's a good story. Here's a guy, white, about the same age I am, grew up within a few miles of each other, but there's no way in hell I would have known him as kids. Well, it's possible. I think we had to come to New York.
But you're great together. There's a lot shared there. And then to make connections, here's Mark Bradford and David Reed at the symposium that we had at the Rose hosted in Boston a year or two ago. And to make that connection for Mark and David, for younger artists like Mark who didn't know there was a history of black abstraction, and also wasn't really connected to the world of painting in New York in a lot of ways. So I feel like that's something you carry wherever you go, and something that has been a lesson for me as much as the work is a lesson and the ideas are a lesson, the way you make a community with other painters, and saying that if you know history, you're never alone.
Well, that's what Franz Klein told me as a young painter. It was a group of us, and it was Franz who told us that. But the way he put it very bluntly, his very words were, The minute you walk into that studio, you pick up that brush, you're part of art history, and I promise you, you'll never be alone. And I believe it. I still believe it.
So I wanted just to end, because I know people have lots of questions, and open it up, and just showing the last one of the black monoliths for Barbara Jordan, just to end where we started. And she ended her commencement address here in 1976 and said, "It's time you begin to make some music. It's time to begin to dream again." And I feel like that's another message that your work is just completely in sympathy with.
We never stop dreaming. We never stop making music. I mean, that's where it's at. Our survival as people depends upon being able to make the music. You know, it's like breathing. That's what you call it. It's like breathing. It's that breathing. The arts come out of that. It's something primordial. I'm lucky. You're looking at a lucky person. You know, I came to New York. I fell into Bill Kunin, Franz Klein, Norman Lewis, Romeo Bearden, Jacob Lawrence, Barney Newman, Rothko. I'm lucky. I'm thankful. I'm very thankful.
Well, there are like hundreds of young artists in New York who feel the same way about, I met Jack Whitten, you know, and when Jack was here at the Rose, there was just a throng, you know, for his show, throngs of art students standing, and he'd just look at, how'd you do this? How'd you do that? And you're just so patient, you know, and you have taught so many young artists.
Yeah.
Jack taught for decades in New York. So you are that Bill de Kooning for, you know, a whole generations of young artists.
Well, one thing I learned from the early jazz musicians, and we have to express this, within the black community, we have continuity. It's there. All you have to do is look for it. What we're talking about, music, what we're talking about, poetry, writing, what we're talking about, the visual arts, there's continuity. It's a rich history. These black monoliths, I could spend the rest of my life doing them. There's plenty of people out there for me to take my hat off.
I'm sure people will be sending you suggestions. Be careful. Let's open it up for other people. I think they want this recorded for posterity.
So you talk about reading being very important. Who are some of the most influential authors that have influenced your artwork as an artist?
Oh man, oh boy, where should I start? Where should I start? It starts with, I have to call the name Jack Whitten, who taught me cabinet making. I'm a trained cabinet maker. It was this man. All through the early 60s, I used to be involved with found objects. I would find something and pick it up. And this guy, older guy, who had a PhD degree in philosophy, he was observing me pick up these things. One day, I picked one up, and Jeff grabbed my arm, and he said to me, "Why did you pick that one up and not that one?" I said, "I don't know, that one attracted me." It was Jeff said, "Well, you should read this." Most of my reading is in philosophy, most of it. People who have made a difference in my life philosophically is people like the German Hans Curated, who wrote the whole book on Symbol. People like Peter Kos on structuralism, Wittgenstein on language, great love of Edwin Purcell. I love Heidegger, the notion of being, all of Kant. It's along those lines.
Like we.
Bachelor. But this is my joy. One of the joys of my life. I live on the Alma Creek in Greece. We have a big porch. We spend our mornings there for breakfast. I look over this beautiful landscape. A joy of my life was a book on herself, and I'm looking at the landscape, 6 o'clock in the morning. I get off on that. But it's writings along that way, right? It's whoever can contribute. So we have to reach out to people. We have to reach out to writers. Anything that, as we say, turn you on. Anything that feeds the imagination. That's why I like the people who are involved with research in particle physics. I mean, I love that. That turns me on. It feeds my imagination. And I gather information there. So it's things along those lines. Novels I'm not so much into. Occasionally, but not so much into.
Are there other questions?
You had talked about the 60s as the time period that was your autobiographical period and a time you had to live through. Can you talk about that? And then my second question for you after that is, how do you explain your ascendancy as a Black person in the world of abstract art? Your ascendancy. Okay, those are two separate, right?
Yes. You know, I was in a car accident once, and I got hurt, and we had to go for a deposition. My lawyer told me, only answer simple questions. Don't answer any compound questions.
Well, can I ask this? So first, explain the 60s first.
Yeah, I wasn't joking about
That's a complicated question.
I wasn't joking about Jack Whitten putting Jack Whitten on the couch, right? I believe that when the question of identity comes up for anybody, black, white, whatever, you have to pick yourself apart sexually. You have to know what you want. You got to know. Do you like to fuck donkeys? You like to fuck pigs? Men? Women? You have to know that. You have to do the experiments to find out what it is sexually that you need. All of us have to do that. And those people who haven't done that, it's painful to see somebody 70 years old and they haven't done that. So you have to pick yourself apart sexually. You have to pick yourself apart spiritually. Now, I grew up in West Alabama with Southern Christian fundamentalism, right? Church of God. I didn't have a choice to say this is what you do. I was told what to do. All through college, down at Tuskegee, we had to go to church whether we liked it or not, 3 times a week. You have to test yourself spiritually, what it is that you believe in. You have to do that. You have to test yourself in terms of economics. What do you want? Is your aim in life to make $1 million? Because I gave a commencement lecture speech out at our San Francisco of the Arts, and I told the students, I said, look, if any of you, if your aim is to make $1 million, then you should become used car salesman. You have to know that. That can be kind of painful in the black community the way I grew up, because there was never any money. It's just, there was no money. I grew up poor. White folks had all the money. So you have to find out what you want in that way and what your needs are, right? There are topics there, which I call them symbols, really. You have to do all of that. You have to make your experiments. And that's what I did in the 1960s. You have to experiment with the notion of politics, the political, which is a big symbol throughout the history of mankind. Another thing that's a must, you have to know what it is do you want. You have to know, is it hate do you want, right? Is it revenge what you want? My grandmother would say, revenge is mine, said the Lord. That's what she would say. But I had to find that out. Like I said, meeting Martin Luther King back in 1957, man impressed me a lot, okay? But when it became my time to be tested down there in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, when people were bleeding, I was tested. Politically, I realized that if I had stayed in Baton Rouge, either I was going to kill somebody or I would be killed. So I had to make a choice. What are you going to do with it? I took a Greyhound bus from New Orleans to New York. This is what I mean by testing. Now, coming to New York, that wasn't the end of it. Vietnam was raging like hell. A lot of black kids were being killed. If I had stayed at Tuskegee, I was on the second lieutenant track being a pilot in the U.S. Air Force. I was a U.S. Air Force ROTC cadet. I would have ended up right in Vietnam, right in the middle. So politics is another one you have to tell. All of this, right? That wasn't the end of it. You get to New York, you got all this freedom, sex. You got all this freedom of drugs. Big thing, right? We tested everything that was on the street. Had to do it. Had to do that. We had feminism to deal with. Women are just saying things to me that no woman has ever said to me before. I never thought of power for women and all of that. I grew up in a church where the women were deacons. But when I got to New York, I love to tell the story about Kate Millett. You know Kate Millett, right? Kate Millett wrote the...
No.
Oh, no, it was sexual politics.
Sexual politics. You know, I knew Kate when she was writing that book, right? Kate woke me up more than once. I love to tell the story of hitting on the ass one night and said, "Hey, baby, what's happening?" Kate looked at me and said, "I don't call you nigger, do I?" Woke me up. I'm learning. I'm a young guy from Alabama testing all these waters. I'm learning. It's that kind of a thing. That was the 1960s. So the 1960s just wasn't one thing. And then you have the whole thing with black politics and identity issues to deal with. You get the picture? So it wasn't one thing. It was the whole complexity of things that we were reading. And if you had been a young artist on the Lower East Side of Manhattan at that time, you were right in the muck of it. All of this was on your shoulder, right? By 1969, it got the best of me. The only time I've gone to a psychiatrist in my life. Bam! Too much! Too much. But, hey, I snapped together, you know. But it's the complexity of the period. Now, the second part of your question, I'm going to proceed with the compound question. I'm going to defy my lawyer. Abstraction was something that was waiting for me. I didn't know enough about it in the early 60s to really deal with it. Okay, early 60s work, we can say figurative expressionism, figurative abstract expressionism. Bob Thompson was a dear friend of mine. Emilio Cruz, Joe Street. We were all in the same boat, you know, and like under the influence of abstract expressionists, right? But those of us who had great ambitions on becoming a painter realized, approaching 1970, there was more to this thing called painting than just figurative expressionism. That's what drove me into abstraction. So in 1970, the studio became more of a laboratory. I went back to my Tuskegee days. I'm thinking, my God, you got to be more systemic in your thinking and dealing with this stuff. You got to start dividing it up and start making experimentations. So I made divisions between the conceptual and the perceptual. Nobody was paying attention in the early 70s to black abstract painters. Nobody did. I'm not going to say that word. Nobody did. A bunch of us downtown there was working in abstraction. Nobody did. I started teaching. I taught for 26 years, professor in advanced painting at Cooper Union. Spent a while at School of Visual Arts. Speaking, meeting with students. It wasn't until approaching, okay, I did the Whitney show in 1975. That helped a lot. Bob Miller gave me a shot in 1978. But still, there was nothing, there was no follow-up. The key to the success of the artist is you have to have commercial representation. You have to. Okay, when you're younger, I can go do a carpenter job, make money as a cabinet maker, do some part-time teaching, hang out at the bar, fuck around all night, drink, get high, and still go to the studio. Who am I kidding? I can't do that today. No one can. You can't do that. It was a long process of things happening, right? Social issues. Then this young lady comes along, and she makes a show called High Times, Hard Times. She with David Reed. And it was that show that pulled a lot of people who were working sort of under the radar in the 1970s, a chance of more visibility. And as I told Katy at the time they did that show, Katy, do you realize that no one ever would have put a black abstract painter in a show like this? It wouldn't happen. Just wouldn't have happened. But it wasn't just I. Howard Dita Pinnell was there, Joel Street was there, Al Loving was there. So that showed up a lot. And then I meet Alexander Gray, the gallery that's represented me for the past 5 or 6 years. More sustained showing, more sustained gallery sales. And now I'm represented by House of Work. So it is the commercial aspect that has always been a burden on the black abstract painter. No one cared. Even people in the black community. Black people, as a rule, have not been that interested in abstract painting. Recently, though, I'm proud to say that I've had black collectors who came forward and say, you know, they support what you're doing. So that's changing. Great mentor, Norman Lewis. Norman wasn't making any money. When I first met him in the early 60s, the thing with Willett was just dying down. Norman didn't even have a gallery. All through the 60s, all through the 1970s, the 1980s, up until he died in the late 70s. There was no gallery representation. This is what has made a difference. The artists need money, all artists. Parents come to me and say, how can I help my daughter, my son? They're interested in art. I said, give them some money and stay out of their life. Sure.
I'm not an art student, and I've always been impressed in seeing art with how do they even envision these kind of pieces of work. So I have so many questions I'd like to ask you.
No compound question?
No compound question. I'm going to make this very simple. Could you talk to me about your experience with your exposure to African art and how that may or may not have influenced your work from there once you were exposed to that? What was it in it that you saw that you hadn't seen anywhere else, and have you take up some of them.
Yeah, I'm a student of art. I'm a student of art history. I mean, I study world art history. I mean, I don't study one branch of art history. I study world art history. But because of my background and the history of my people, it was important that I understand African art. That was important. I realized that in the early 60s. And I made it a quest. That's why I started doing those wood carvings. I discovered that down in African art, there's something in art history we refer to as the unit. You can think of it in scientific terms like a molecule, like an atom. When people first discovered the atom, right? And then we realized that all matter is made up of this. We know that. I found that down in African art, that kind of a thing exists. And it's coded. What it has taught me by doing the sculpture and into the painting is that there is coded information down in that unit that is located into African art. The environment that those things were produced in, we don't have that anymore. I know a lot of people who romantically say that they have it, but I tell them they're bullshit. You don't. We live in a modern technological world, right? And we live under the influence of capitalism. But if we can take that information that I'm speaking of and use it, which I find that it's usable today, we can translate it, but we have to learn to decode it. The jazz musicians were the first people who turned me on to this. They knew that down in those sounds, by the way, I played tenor saxophone all through junior high school, college, dance band. The tenor saxophone was my love. And I was expecting, I said, I wasn't that bad. I figured, maybe I had a shot at it. I played all through down in Baton Rouge when I was in school at Southern, in New Orleans. I made a little chunk change. But when I came to New York and started meeting the early jazz musicians and hanging out at the jazz clubs, I realized I didn't have a chance in hell. So that's why I got rid of the horn. But the jazz musicians knew that down there in those chords, in those sounds, that unit exists. See, that's an equivalent of what I'm talking about in jazz. That I know. There's an equivalent there. It's within that unit. That's what led me into concepts that I speak of often as molecular perception. It's a degree of perception that goes deep down into the atomic structure of a sound, the atomic structure of light, and it's translatable in painting the same way it's translatable into sound. Philosophically, jazz is the expansion of freedom. This is why people like it. Everywhere I go in the world, people have heard those sounds. There's something about that sound that turns them on. What is it? It's the expansion of freedom. Once the freedom expands, as consciousness expands. That's where perception lies. All reality is based upon perception. All of it. All art is based on perception. You change the perception, you change the reality. But you have to go deep. Deep. You have to go down into the pure molecular structure of existence. That's the pool of abstraction. That's the value of it.
So, I think we may be out of time, but let me say,
that's going to take the rest of
it's
the
going
weekend.
there's a I think what I want to say is that I talk to a lot of artists, and I listen to a lot of artists talk, but I don't listen to anybody as closely as I listen to you, period.
Yeah.
And that has been my experience for congratulations on your honorary doctorate. Well earned.
Very good. Thank you. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
Yeah,